Right, so the attendees are in, of course, they're not going to be able to speak tonight. It is just a workshop with the commission. So in attendance for staff is Tabitha Harkin and me, Deb Jones, and then we also have representatives from Horsley Witten here, Jeff Davis, Nate Kelly, and Kelly King.
Okay. All right, so we can move on to old business. The first item is text amendment pre-application data centers. I'd like to go over and discuss the questions that have been raised for those.
Believe Horsley Witten has a PowerPoint that they can share their screen to kind of guide us through those questions.
All right.
Yep, let me pull that up. All right. So if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to just have a handful of slides on data centers. This is one that we have not had a chance to discuss as a group yet in great detail since our first meeting. So I think I'd like to briefly go through all the slides related to data centers and then circle back and go through the questions. So data centers, again, I think you know the background at this point, and Kevin has been very helpful in filling us in on in greater detail on how these work. So, you know, from the outside, they look a lot like any other commercial or light industrial use, but they are quite different. They are high electricity and water users. One thing that we've discussed a lot is they use backup generators. So they do have a lot of potential energy use, relatively high noise production, enhanced safety and security needs, and generally low employment densities. There aren't a whole lot of people working in these buildings. So on the one hand, you're not getting a whole lot of employment, but on the other hand, you're not generating a whole lot of traffic. So the policy decisions I'm hoping we can discuss today, and again, I'd like to go through all these first and then we can go back and discuss them. First of all, should data centers be a regulated permitted use in the town, or should they be a prohibited use throughout the town? That's really the ultimate first question we need to determine. If you do decide to permit and regulate them, in what zoning districts should they be located? And should an overlay zone be considered? Horsley Witten Group, as we've done in the past, continues to recommend that if you allow these, they should be restricted to industrial districts. 3, what size data center should trigger regulations? So according to your moratorium on data centers, 5,000 square feet or larger. And we do think that remains reasonable, but would love your feedback on that. Should data centers be permitted by rights with conditions and or with a special permit? And finally, if data centers are a permitted use, should cryptocurrency mining be a distinct use from data centers? And should cryptocurrency mining be a permitted use in the town? And we've been trying to do a little bit more research on this as well. They are, by my read, largely you're dealing with a lot of the same issues. I don't know if there's been any pressure on the town to host cryptocurrency mining in any way. Certainly, this is not among the things that the state has been encouraging to occur separate from data centers. So if you do decide to allow data centers with conditions, what are some of the things that we can put conditions on? We have noise standards and vibration standards. And of course, a lot of that is already in your environmental performance standards. So we would have to discuss if you want anything above and beyond your existing environmental standards. Size limits. This is one of the things that a number of people in the community in their testimony and their letters have expressed concern over. You know, the other parts of the country where these have been allowed have become very large and taken up a very, very large number of square miles in certain communities. So certainly it's within your rights to set a limit on the size, the square footage of any given facility. Whether you want to require enhanced security, so fencing, gated access points, special lighting, whether there should be additional setbacks and buffering from abutting residential properties. Again, you already have pretty strong buffering requirements in your existing regulations. So the question is, are those sufficient? Would you want more than what your regulations already require? That you would have agreements with water and electrical utilities demonstrating that they have the capacity to meet the demands of the data center. And then some of the things that Kevin initially brought to our attention, do you want to set performance standards for renewable energy use or development or offset purchases, or even set emission standards? Hey, you could stand firm and say, we want zero emissions for this development, and you have to show us in your agreement with the town how you're going to achieve that. There's no reason you couldn't stand firm and say, we want the greenest data centers in the country, should you choose to allow them at all. Other common things, notification of abandonment, very similar to what we would have for solar energy facilities or wind, and then a fire suppression and mitigation plan. So those are some of the major issues that we wanted to talk about this evening. So I'll go back to the questions, and we can start with number one, or if anyone has any other thoughts that they wanted to share before we dive into the question, please feel free. And Jeff, I'll defer to you to call on individual members.
Well, should we start with the item on size first?
Sure.
I'm not sure whether that makes a difference on what we'd really be talking about by size, whether we want to, is 5,000 square feet a good number, and is everything else just bigger than that, has the same requirements, or does it make a difference whether we get these huge data centers and are handled differently?
Right, and that's one of the questions. Are you comfortable hosting a huge data center, or would you like to put, an aggregate cap on that size so that you just aren't dealing with that scale of data center at all?
Yeah, well, that's what I'd like to hear from Kevin, if he has any input.
Yeah, sure.
On what these, on a data center that I guess is unique when we're talking at a data center, its primary purpose, so it wouldn't be an ancillary use.
Right.
Right. So 5,000 just overall is a very low number, right? And so what 5,000 does, though, it provides the trigger that basically if you're coming in here with a data center more than 5,000 square feet, then it's going to trigger whatever we choose to regulate or permitted use as far as that's concerned. So it's a very, very low number. And the only thing I'm just concerned about is if we get, which Pfizer obviously and EB are in a different part of town as far as zoning is concerned. If we get a large business, is that something that would block them in any way? And as we move out of the moratorium within 10 months or whatever we have, is there an ability to say, as long as it's attached to a business similar to a Pfizer? I don't have the correct verbiage here. It doesn't trigger anything specific. For instance, if a Pfizer takes a different building in town and they put a 10,000 square foot data center in there, I don't think it has the same regulations, or should, as a standalone data center. So my only point, Mr. Chair, is I don't understand the verbiage on that, but it's a very low number, and it will certainly, for standalone data centers, it basically will say that anything that does come into the town would need to be under this regulation that we're about to create.
That's what my concern was. Do we treat a data center, a small data center associated with a business, differently than just a data center that serves everybody?
Okay, well, Kevin, didn't you say it there when you said standalone?
Yes, I did.
That's what I think is we should be treating them differently.
Yeah.
I do.
So everything here is with the assumption that it's a standalone use. You could
Right.
certainly have a different set of standards for these as accessory uses.
No, I don't know that we even care about accessory use.
If you don't care about accessory use, then
That's
another
my feeling. with it.
question. Sure.
Yeah.
Mhm. And I
Yeah.
don't know if 5,000 square feet is the right number. I mean, we just picked it up so we could pass.
Yeah.
moratorium.
I think the zoning official had picked that number 5,000. So, I mean, 5,000 is a very low number, but it, it basically states that anything that comes in that we're about to create, yes, you're going to have to, follow these regulations from 5,000 square feet and up. So I don't mind that number at all.
Mhm, okay.
Is it safe to just flat out dismiss accessory use? I just can see abuse of that in some way. For some business to kind of show up and have a decent business of doing whatever they do, and they happen to have an accessory use of a 20,000 square foot data center, of which they don't really use much of it themselves. The business was just set up to make it an accessory use. Because what we're looking for is something that's integral to the business,
Right.
Existing businesses mostly.
Yes.
existing business.
Well, or like, say, a big bank like Chelsea.
Yeah.
They have the headquarters here in Groton. They should be allowed to me to have their own data center just to service them. I think it's just a text on what we.
And
call
Kevin,
it.
I have a technical question for you.
Yeah.
Would it be possible, you think, for the town to regulate, say, it must be an accessory use to another permitted business, and the storage must be for that business and not for a broader audience?
Yeah, sure. That makes a lot of sense, because that way you knock out all the co-locations, et cetera, and say, well, I'm Chelsea Groton, but I'm also serving, 20 other banks with what I've done. And so that does pick that up in that particular regard. So I'd be in favor of something like that if someone has better language than I presently do.
Well, what if somebody comes in like a Pfizer and says, well, we have a need for 50,000 square foot building,
Yeah.
I think we still need to require the same noise and other standards we're gonna have. In fact, even for a much smaller building, if you happen to be next to a residential area or something.
Yeah.
And remember, you do have all those environmental performance standards for basically businesses that abut residential. So all of that gets triggered, whatever you decide.
Right, but I think as we know from the last go around, it's the other things that are different in data centers that are a significant concern, especially the abutting neighbors or residential areas. So I think we need some controls over when anyone comes in with a larger data center.
Well, maybe your example of Pfizer's is a good one, because they're a national or international company.
Right.
If they use Groton for their whole network of business centers, I think that would be treated differently than if it was just in town or to support the local.
Right, it would have to be to support your facilities on site.
On site, yes,
I like that.
yeah.
Devil's in the details on that one.
Mhm.
So I guess from what I'm hearing, you wouldn't have an accessory use that was on another piece of property.
I mean, unless you felt like you were comfortable having it be adjacent, but no, I don't think you'd see something
I know that's-
happening across town that.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I'll give
No,
the
that's-
example.
that would make sense to me. And then that's,
Yeah. So I like it, and I like it with those extra words regarding an organization, for its specific use is for that organization only. And I'll just say the one example that I do have is, like, if you look at Intel in Hillsborough, we have a I don't know, 60, 70,000 square foot regular building. We have a data center that's not connected, but you physically walk to maybe 50 yards, 100 yards, and it's 30,000 square feet, built from the ground up. And of course, it's, perfectly green. It's got all the right certification, et cetera, but it's not attached, I guess. That's my only point. But it is for our exclusive use.
And it's on the same property.
It is on the same
Yes.
property.
Okay.
All right.
Is square footage the best metric to use when measuring these things, or is there some better? I mean, obviously, we're concerned planning and zoning wise with the size of the building, but
Yeah.
I'm just throwing it out there. Is there a different way or a better way to
Yeah.
measure these things?
Well, the different way is wattage, right? How many watts can a particular data center handle? And that could be an additional metric. That's a real tough thing to measure. I mean, people project that more than anything else, but it's just different. I'm not sure it's better. I don't mind the square footage because, if the computer technology continues to shrink in its own way, 5,000 square foot, it's a powerful little data center, but it's not going to be able to do a lot of other things. However, here's my other thing, which based on that, is when we get down to cryptocurrency mining. I mean, you can put under 5,000 square foot cryptocurrency mining, and we'll talk about that in a second. But 5,000 square feet to me is a very low number, but I think it's a good measurement that we have. So,
And I say we come across this issue with again other energy uses such as solar and wind, where we really try to discourage, at least in zoning, for these things to be regulated by their capacity, because as Kevin mentioned, that technology is always changing and it's sort of a moving target for the town to be regulating. Whereas really your purview is the land use, the physical space that something takes up. So it is generally our recommendation for things like this that you do base these metrics on square footage.
that makes sense to me.
Well, my only thought is that as wattage goes up, and I don't even know, but I'm
Yeah.
just gonna suggest that the things we do regulate, noise and things like that, lighting and like that noise isn't related to square footage as much as it might be to wattage.
Oh, but
Do
isn't
they
the
get
noise,
noisier at higher wattage?
but if we limit the noise, whatever we've limited it to, the limit stays the same.
Exactly. So you
So
still have to
triple-
hit that decibel threshold, and
All right.
whether it's, yeah,
It'll just get harder and harder to do. But that's-
exactly.
I'm starting from square one here, so.
And that's okay.
Well, it's better to raise the questions
Absolutely.
today. Yeah, because wattage would be tough to measure, or they might have it start, and if it increased, you'd never know it.
Right.
So.
Right.
All right, why don't we go back to I guess we understand the size thing now. So let's go back to question one, whether they should be regulated, permitted or used. I'd recommend regulating them. I don't know what other people's thoughts are. If anybody
Could
disagrees.
you just
with that.
explain what is the difference between regulated and permitted use, just to make sure I understand that?
Well, that we
Oh,
have
that-
regulations.
Right. So
Right.
someone could be a permitted use without regulations.
Got it.
You can just say, yes, this is a use that's allowed by right versus something that is allowed, and we're going to have additional conditions put on it.
I think we need additional conditions for data.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yep.
one.
And I don't think we
Agree.
should go prohibit them because they're
Not yet.
not, yeah.
So is there
Well,
anyone who thinks that these should be prohibited?
No,
No. Regulated.
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 Okay. So in the zoning districts, I mean, obviously right now they would be in industrial districts. I think it makes sense. But I don't understand what the difference between light industry and heavy industry is when you read the regulations, our zoning regulations. They don't make any sense.
Hmm.
To me, it's either size
Well,
or
it might be something that you
volume of
might,
business.
that's where you would use your square footage, in that in light industrial, they've got to be below 5,000 square or whatever,
No,
pick a number. And then,
no, I don't disagree with that. I just think that we have to have a good definition in our regulations on what light industry is and what heavy industry is.
Well-
You don't find the industrial mixed use a clear definition? Because I thought when it talks about low to moderate impact industrial, and I
Yeah.
guess that's why I would take issue, I guess, with Horsley Witten's things that the data centers may be physically indistinguishable from any commercial or light industrial users
No,
or uses. I don't think so at all, but
No, I,
That's
What
why-
do you see, Sue, as being different from the outside?
yeah, it says large footprint
Yeah.
industrial uses under the
To-
IG.
to
zones.
me, they ought to be only allowed in large or heavy industry.
Yeah, I agree.
Hmm.
I agree
I
with the
agree
definition.
also.
Okay,
Yep.
Okay, just so
Whatever.
everybody is aware that that is just down by the airport.
Yep.
Okay,
But
Go
is it,
ahead.
That's eliminating the primary place. Where
that's
would we-
eliminating the IM zone, which is along Flanders Road and 117,
Oh, I
north and
didn't
south
know
of
that.
95.
I thought by looking at the map, I must have misread it then. That it included those areas.
The heavy industrial zone is the IG, and that is down at Leonard Drive, the airport.
Well, to me, that's light industry.
Well, that's heavy, the airport.
That's the heavy industrials that are allowed there.
Well, it doesn't make any sense.
Well, someone can also
definition.
build light industrial there as well.
Yeah,
If
but
that's
that's
what they
all that's
choose to do.
there. I mean, if I'm just looking at.
That's
the
what
text-
someone chose to do.
te-
But you
text
couldn't put
in the
heavy, right
zoning
now you
ordinance.
can't put heavy industrial.
I thought that. I was reading it. But I think it's whatever. I guess I must have misread it. I think those large areas, maybe there was another map that was given to us at one time. That showed the areas where they might be able to go. So you think they're in the IM area to,
So what I'm hearing from the commission is that you want it in only in the heavier industrial, and that's the zone that's down by the airport, the IG.
oh, no.
I'm not sure I believe in that, dude.
I don't think so.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure everybody knew where these.
No, I know.
I would think
I'm also
that
not
they-
looking at a map, so, and I'm not saying by looking at a map, I'll know, but is it true that light industrial is closer to residential areas than heavy industrial? Is that a correct correlation?
Not necessarily.
necessarily.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think that's a great question. I was looking at that too, for the heavy industrial. And, the airport's pretty much surrounded by water, et cetera.
Yeah,
Very, very close to it. There's certainly some intense, it's RS12 zoning. And then also there's a MTC across from some of it. If you go over the IG by Quonic Bridge and stuff, then you're really next to the R12 neighborhood. So
Mhm.
it's hard in this town to, find something, I guess, at this point.
Well, you need the large area.
Yeah, you do. And far away, even the one up, Holstein's and all, and the one over by 117, it's hard to get something where you're really away from the residential neighborhoods.
Which is why, we worked so hard on the buffer standards in the zoning, because there are so many issues with, industrial lands being in proximity to residential. So that's why those buffer standards are in place. That's why the environmental performance standards are in place for noise and
Mhm.
vibration and odor and so forth.
I guess one thing I don't know is, I don't know if, Kevin, you were talking about the green data centers.
right.
Does that change the amount of noise and all that other stuff that so often, people object to?
It certainly limits it depending on, the type of power sources that are being used, or in lieu of diesel generators, which are by far, extremely loud component of some of the older style data centers. So the question is a good one, right? Because if part of our regulation, and my point is we have to stand out, and I'd love to work with the economic group within Groton on this. We need to stand out against others. My belief is you're starting to see it in areas of like Kansas, where they're completely green data center areas, right? And so, for instance, if you do that off of Flanders Road and you don't have the noise, you don't have the diesel, being put into a fine mist. And I don't know that much, frankly, about water at this time, but we need to look at that. What's wrong with it there, right? I'm not sure, as I said, that should be a decision until maybe we look at that one a little bit more carefully. So, Hal, what do you think? You always have.
I kind of agree with that. Is that, well, the water, I think, is a bit of a red herring for this. The outrageous use of water comes for using water for cooling.
Right.
So you don't need to do that. No, I'm not completely in agreement with what they were saying. They were going to use all air source cooling, magic word being not air cooling, air source cooling, meaning air conditions like you and I have, as opposed to ground source where you use wells. One of those two things would be fine. Using an above ground air source is that much noisier. The way to not use that is to use water for your cooling.
That's right.
And that's when the crazy amounts of water come in. As soon as you don't do that, the amount of water you're using is to flush the toilets. It's just very little. I mean, there's some interior circulation and whatnot. It's incredibly minor water use. So don't have to worry about that so much. What were the other issues talking about there?
I think water is the big issue. Noise is always the issue, right?
Right.
And so if you're not using diesel generators, that cuts it down a great deal. But if your cooling power is by air conditioning, you're so that's going to be a discernible noise. There's no doubt. Right? You hear the hum, right? Even before the peak shaving comes in, you hear that hum the whole time.
And there's a point. Oh, that's what I want to mention about the peak shaving. But let me first back up with the noise. One of the things I found with the agreement that the town was trying to push that was so egregious was that we'd come up with a decent noise standard, and we could probably come up with something.
Right.
And then they say, and if it doesn't meet it, then we'll start to talk about how to remedy it. And that's bizarre. I mean, it's like saying, okay, if the building's not to code, we'll keep using it, except we'll start to talk about how to put it back into code. And no, that's kind of a basis thing that I'd just like to throw out, saying, if we come up with a sound thing, in order to get your occupancy permit or the permit to enlarge it in any way, you've got to come up with testing out the system and proving that it meets the conditions. Which will be the same for anything else. So I don't know why noise should be an exception to that. So, and I think that you can fix any acoustic problem if you throw money at it. We really can, but you have to do it up front and not just make an agreement to try to work on it later on.
No, it has to be demonstrated to get a certificate of occupancy.
Correct. And that,
or the design approved.
That's correct. Design approval and show us that it works, and then
actually have a
fire it up before you occupy it, and show us that your design worked. And that's when you get it. So you have the two-step thing. It's not unusual to prove that your thing worked. And it's not even an exceptional requirement. It's just that it's so tough to do. Well, lots of things are tough to do. So we'll make this one tougher.
Kevin, are you still with us? Oh, go ahead, Al.
So if you make it quiet, you're not going to use the water. Those kind of the big things. I guess there was the extra one for that site, which kept kicking in about what do you do with all that rooftop water coming onto it. And that, I suppose, needs going into the tributaries. And I suppose that's something to be looked into. If we had an actual light industrial project go in there, one building at a time, one 4,000 square foot building at a time, and end up with 10 of them, no one would have noticed. We would have had 10 little parking lots and 10 sets of roofs and a huge amount of square footage of incubator type stuff, and we would have thought it was great. But maybe that's something that the required engineering to take care of the the water coming off of the roof is something that just, whatever
That's-
normally is required, just needs to be up there up front. Otherwise, I don't see a problem. I think it's something that you can, as I would like to say, you can take this square peg and shave off so much of the edges that it fits into the round hole.
Mhm.
Hey, Kevin, can I ask you a technical question?
Yeah,
Is the technology there to have a complete battery backup for, a 50 megawatt plant?
so my understanding is they're just now being proposed in many situations. And I think I sent this to Jeff, et cetera, a couple examples where the battery backups are there. I mean, if you look at, the big battery people, I think it's Generac and a few others, they're saying they're on the cusp of that, right? And if you really look at the regulations that we're proposing now, I'd love to see it as soon as they're complete, that we get a bunch of data centers, but most likely, we're going to be out a couple years where people realize what we've done, and hopefully that they're embraced the green standards that we have. So the answer is, I think if I were to look at technology, 2 to 3 years, I think it's going to be there, Steve. I think it's on the cusp now. I think it could be argued either way for the moment, right?
Well, that may be the only way they can meet the noise.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Maybe.
That's really what's, I think, how you manage it is by having a tight noise standard
Right.
at the edge of the property. And they have to figure out, are they going to use gas turbines or batteries or
Yep.
whatever.
Right.
But that
Yeah.
gets into the power shaving too.
Peak shaving. Yeah.
Peak shaving. That they've got to keep that in mind, is in addition to just backup power. Which,
Yeah.
Hmm?
So
Kevin,
the answer to the question. Oh, go ahead.
I have a question, which you just raised. I'll try and remember the other thing, which was the peak shaving.
Yeah.
It kind of threw me for a loop when it was mentioned that in this case, peak shaving to them means taking the entire facility offline and producing 100% of its own power. And that's how they sized the generation capacity. My understanding of peak shaving more often is just to bring down the amount of electricity it's used. They're very modest generators. So is this idea of just taking it completely offline kind of integral with the business of these things? Or is that just something that they kind of threw out
No.
there?
So how, which I don't think was mentioned in the presentations before. So the presentation they provided was called a tier 4, right? So a tier 4 hyperscale has certain elements into it. Doesn't mean it's larger. It means it has more backup. So I believe a tier 4, what it really means, one of the things, first of all, it needed 2 power sources, needed feeds from 2 completely different areas. But the other side is that if you lose power completely, that a tier 4 needs to have 100% capacity to keep it up and going. Now, what I understand peak shaving, and I talk about it all the time when I'm in Data Center Alley, it means just what you said. It supplements when certain rates kick in, or as happening in Data Center Alley now, Dominion Resource is saying, I can't meet the needs of it. And they're looking for a moratorium for that reason. That's where peak shaving is typically used. But a tier 4, I believe you need to do it 100%, have the ability to do it 100%.
Yeah, but
I don't think we
Kevin,
have a problem.
don't all data centers need 100% backup though?
No, they don't. So for
So if
instance,
there's a power failure that they just stop?
no, they won't stop, but they'll reduce their usage in some way. So for instance, a corporation does that all the time. If we're losing it, you may not have, you may have, I'm just picking 12 hours of backup at 70% capacity. You may have 4 hours of backup at 100% capacity. So the algorithm moves up and down. But the big data centers, where, for instance, Google just had a big fire the other day in one of those, et cetera, they want in a tier 4, 100%. And I don't know how long that's for, Steve, though, but that's what they're looking for.
Okay.
Okay.
So the answer, go back to the question, do we recommend restricting this to industrial districts? So my answer is yes, but I think we just need to make a decision between heavy industrial and light industrial, right? Or we push that decision, so we research that a little more.
Yeah, I think what would be really helpful for me is if I knew what some of these things like electricity and water use, noise production, these sort of main things, particularly the neighbors were concerned with, what would they be like under the regular old fashioned, as it were, data center versus a green data center?
Well,
Yeah.
I think we have to establish limits for those things, noise.
Right, and again, you have
Runoff of,
limits for noise today. You have buffers between residential and industrial and commercial uses today. You have the odor standards. So a lot of those things are in place. And I think someone said this earlier, if you set the performance standards that you want for a green facility, it's probably going to make it easier for them to hit these other environmental performance standards. And it may be a couple of years down the road before they're able to do that. But if you want to hold your guns and say, okay, these are the performance standards that we need you to meet if you're going to come into our community, then when technology is ready, you'll get that knock at your door, right?
or are they gonna get it ready?
Yeah.
And in the meantime, if it means that your standards make it infeasible or unlikely that the data center is going to be able to come in and meet your standards, do you
Oh,
care?
What
Would you
are the
like to
existing noise limits now?
Yeah, that was my
I
question.
don't know what they are. I
No,
didn't-
they're very, very,
They're
they're
high.
almost non-existent.
Well, aren't they the DEP's standards?
Yeah, but it's, I don't think that, I think that if we were to say that, we need to address that issue.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
That's what I think. I
It's an
think
ongoing issue.
you gotta look at background noise existing today and say you can go up by just a few dB over that.
Well, plus, it's a different kind of noise too. Apparently, it's a lot more irritating, or can be.
And it's 24 hours a day.
Right.
I mean, it's,
No, but you gotta take I would think you take the background noise at nighttime. And you can't exceed that level by a certain amount.
I-95.
Low. Hmm?
So that's I-95 noise.
Well, wherever it is. Hmm?
I-95 at night can be pretty quiet.
Well, but in
No,
an
but
industrial area,
it's the other noise that's there. If it's I-95 at night and it's quiet, that means they cannot exceed that noise level.
Yeah, but just remember, Jeff, two identical noise sources add up to more noise.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it should be, but it's at the property boundary, I would think you should be able to keep it down to a reasonable amount. Or
Right. So right now, your standards are no higher than 70 decibels during the day and no more than 50 at night. And there are other communities that do as you say and say, all right, we're going to measure the decibels today, and you can't go up by more than say 5 decibels beyond that. And again, that's part of your
That's a lot,
certificate of
yes.
occupancy. You have to demonstrate that.
Yeah.
it's 70 decibels from where? Is it the lot line?
Yeah, that's usually it.
I mean, that's generally right. Again, you're following the state standards, and I'm almost positive the state standards are from the property line. I can't swear to it, but I'm fairly certain that's correct.
No, I
Yeah,
think
we had a
that's
rock
right.
crusher incident.
Yeah, Whittles was that,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Well, a constant drone of 70 decibels would be really obnoxious
Mm.
at the edge of a residential area.
Mhm.
Would.
It would be, that's 70 decibels when you walk into a restaurant is where you think this is a nice lively restaurant. You have to raise your voice a
That's
little
all.
bit.
That's awful noisy then.
It's a bit noisy. It's
70
fun
is-
because it's not super noisy. You're not shouting, but you're raising your voice. And that's the level where you really can be heard across the table. When you get to 75, it gets hard to be heard across the table.
Well, every 6 dB is doubling the noise.
That's correct.
Mm.
It's the pressure, so it's the pressure wave.
Yeah, the energy is doubling.
So it has to do with how you perceive it, but that's correct. So it's 70 is getting pretty loud.
That's
which is
Or
probably perfectly
concentrate.
okay and expected at an industrial area, but maybe not in a light industrial area. Maybe that's the
Right.
difference.
I think it's too high for if you're adjacent to a residential area.
Mm.
So we may
Well, how
have
do
to
people
come up
feel
with
about-
our own
I mean,
own
that's-
values.
again, one of the things I've seen in other communities, if you're abutting a residential area, you can't increase the decibel, or you could go up, I've seen by 5. And then if you're not within a certain distance of a residential area, it's less of an issue and you can stick with your existing noise standards.
I don't think it's nearly, that's impossible at all to have where you abut a residential area that you can't change for one of these things, that you cannot change the sound. You can't, whatever the sound is from the highway at any given time on the average, that's it. Because I think that's very doable.
Mhm.
It's an extra concrete block wall. It's an
Sure.
extra baffles. It's very doable.
I think you're right, Hal. I think that's what we should aim for.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot, but it's really not to anyone who knows what you're doing.
Well, I think it'd be good to know how noisy green data centers are. They must have that somewhere, that information.
Yeah.
Kevin, road trip.
Oh, no, I mean, I even gave Jeff Davis, some of the sites, and they have a lot of great papers on this type of stuff. And I just think we have to look into it.
Right. And again, whether it's green or not, doesn't matter.
Right.
What
That's right.
matters are your performance standards, right?
Yeah, correct.
And however they meet them is how they meet them. And if they end up meeting them because they're getting rid of diesel fuel generators and working on all
Whatever.
battery, then
Atomic.
whatever.
Or solar, right, whatever it is.
Exactly. So what's really important is your standards, and then they have to come to you and show you how they're meeting those standards.
Yeah. So can I propose the answer to number 2 is that, do we intend to restrict it to industrial districts? The answer is yes. But we also need to set tiers as far as within those industrial districts, what we may be able to do in the light versus a heavy, and or the proximity to a residential neighborhood.
Mhm.
I mean, I know it gets more complex, but that's part of the regulation, right?
Yep.
Yep.
Agree.
And what about this issue of absolute size? Are people comfortable with these being as large as a parcel can accommodate? And it's not like you're rural Virginia where there is lots and lots of land available,
Right.
fairly limited. So are you comfortable with, basically the size of your existing parcel sort of setting an actual cap on the size of these things? Or would you like to limit the square footage of any data center?
Well, the building size is limited by the regulations today.
That's true too. Yep.
But if it's a huge building, do we look at it like we do in residential multi-use or apartments and require something to break up the building so it doesn't appear to be one big block?
Right. And do you care? I mean, again, you've got
I
the
think we
buffering and
do
the
care.
screening
I think-
that would be in place.
Yeah, but if it's visible from the residence or an adjacent road or highway, I would think we might want to have some controls over the appearance of the building, so it doesn't look as it's a big block.
Well,
That goes
right
back-
now, yeah, it calls for, where it says 40% building cover is the maximum allowed in each one of the industrial districts.
Mhm.
Right. So it's good. You've got a natural limitation based
Right.
on the lot sizes and the controls for the 2 industrial districts today. And that may be sufficient to manage the size of any one of these things. And again, I also encourage you not to put standards on this use that you wouldn't put on other industrial uses if they're not related to, so if you have standards for breaking up a data center, then you should have those same standards for any industrial building. If you do decide to go down that road.
Well, except this light industrial or mixed use has a 25 minimum setback, for example, on the sides. And if we have a really tall, large building, I would think we would want to change some of these things, understanding 40% building cover would apply. You wouldn't want it to be on the edge next to some homes only 25 feet away or something.
That's our buffer right now.
Yep, on the side.
And
30,
me-
30 otherwise, so.
for me, Jeff, I think that this is something far beyond, I mean, like when the size of these buildings is for me beyond comprehension. And so,
Right.
and I don't mean that like absolute, I don't mean that like, it's just something that I never considered before. And so that when I think of other light industrial uses, I don't think of buildings this big. So that's where I'm coming from. And then also I want to, at some point, we should have a conversation about the water, the WRPD, and if buildings of this nature, that size, belong in the WRPD. My concerns are changing the hydrology of the area with a building like this, changing the flow of streams or water where it's going. We used to have a regulation that demanded that water that landed somewhere ended up in the same water course that it would have originally gone to, that we don't have that anymore. So I would like to absolutely address the WRPD because nothing is more important to me than our reservoir.
So two things again, I go back to the point about, you're already allowing industrial uses of a certain size within these districts. So unless someone comes in requesting a variance, you've already limited the size of the building that could be allowed and that footprint. And that footprint is the same whether someone comes in wanting to do a data center or whether someone comes in and wants to have a Coke bottling factory or whatever it may be. So we do want to make sure that any performance standards that we're providing for data centers are specific to unique things about data centers, or we are applying to any use allowed within these districts. So I don't want to go down the path of thinking, okay, we're going to add all these extra things for data centers that we wouldn't also add for other industrial uses. And frankly, industrial uses that may be even more harmful to the environment.
I guess for me, though, it's that I never conceived of a building this large. And I know that we had a conversation years ago. We were talking about the property off of Flanders Road north of this. And I think it was Jeff who said, like, GM isn't coming to Groton to build an auto plant. And that was the kind of thought that I had, is that we weren't thinking at that time of buildings of this size. So it was just sort of off of the radar for me. And so I think that maybe when you get into buildings that are as big as this, there should be, I mean, and maybe it's just me, I never thought about it, but this is a whole new, for me to conceptualize just how, I've never seen a building this big before, so.
Before we move on, Michael, I just wanted to let you know that that regulation regarding stormwater runoff is still in the regulations. You can't change watersheds with the post-development. So that still is.
I stand corrected. I thought that was something that was put. I'll have to look in my regulations because I didn't think it was in there. Thank you.
Yep.
Do you know? Let me know what that one is so I
I
can
will
look at
do
it again,
that.
Jeff.
Yeah.
If you would. Thank
I
you.
will.
I appreciate that. I don't mean to misspeak.
I guess,
actually-
just one point on the mixed use industrial. It does have a maximum building height of 6 stories. And I think often when we're thinking about that, yes, it's a 40% building cover, but 6 stories, if you covered 40% and had your setbacks and all that, that would still be maybe too much. And I guess my other question is, because I really don't know data centers, maybe you don't need 6 stories. I really don't know what the typical height would be for a green type or.
So,
Right.
so they're sprawling facilities, right? But I don't know the exact height, but I don't think they're more than 2 stories high. But I don't know that. Is 2 stories high, 30 feet or 24 feet, right? But these are
Right.
typically nowhere close because you can't stack up things in that particular fashion as the technology is right now. So typically, what is 2 stories? Is that 20 feet, 24 feet?
Actually,
Yeah,
it's-
it depends on the facility, but yes, that's generally true is that these are, and that's true for all most modern industrial uses are not
Yes.
tall. They
Correct.
are horizontal. And again, what I want to reiterate is whether it is a 6-story building covering 40% of the lot and it's a data center or it's some other allowed use, should not matter. Like if you have a problem with that, then we need to change the dimensional standards for the industrial districts for everyone.
Yeah, I want to echo that. Jeff is absolutely right. I mean, just
Yeah.
putting conditions on an industrial use that is just specific to data centers because, that doesn't apply to other industrial uses in that zone.
Yes, no, I appreciate that. I just,
Other
Or-
uses that are not fundamentally different from the type of building. That's going to put this regulation in jeopardy.
Right.
Yeah, no, and
Right.
I don't have any inherent, there's nothing like it's not, I agree with you 100%. I understand that. I'm not focused on this industry. It's mostly my concern is with the size of these buildings and what the effect they'll have on noise, water, and the reservoir.
Okay.
But the size doesn't make it noisy. The
Nope.
size can affect the water, but since the regulations require you to process the water coming off the roof,
Right.
and most of the project we've seen have been doing that. There's all these, they're called them rain gardens, but they're retention ponds and and cisterns and all this other kind of stuff to process the water before it's released. We kind of already have that. And those can actually end up being another natural limitation to the size.
Right.
If in fact, I don't know how, if you make a 100,000 square foot building, I don't know how you process all that water. So you'd have to make it smaller. I don't know how you'd make it quite that quiet. So you'd have to keep it that much farther away from the residential. I think we have those things. Those things happen, of course. That it is big. We've already allowed that. If this were and to the point that is being made there is that if this were somebody came in and wanted to do a 20,000 square foot sheet metal stamping thing that operated 24 hours a day, our discussion would be a little bit different. We would have even asked, might not have even asked what the process was. And it would be hysterically noisy and huge.
Mm.
The size, I think, by the way, I think the size, unless they've changed the way this process is, the cooling for these is such a big deal. And so you end up with any 1-story building ends up being about 2.5 stories high.
Yeah, that's it.
So it's like 25 or almost 30 feet tall per story, because there's an interstitial layer above where these things are, where the actual workings are, that's tall enough to walk around and put in equipment and has gigantic ductwork going through it. And then something below it with it's all an enormous plenum where the air is sucked back down to be sucked up. So these are tall stories, even though when you're in there, it's only 9 or 10 feet tall. But then it takes more than twice that much room to cool it.
Mm.
So you 2 stories of that, you could get up to 60 feet.
Yeah.
right.
So
I
I don't
just
have a
think-
problem with the size. I mean, I have to say I go along. If we're saying it's heavy and we're light industrial and it's 40%, I just say that's what it is. I mean, these things are big, but if we have enough land and that covers only 40%, I don't have a problem with that.
Well, it says 40% of 165 acres is a big deal. And I
Yeah.
don't think that was contemplated in this, that there would be a business like that. This is also new. But it's,
That's our
I think
regulation.
it's important to know that in fact, they would not be that high. If that's the case, and it'd be good to try to deal with that so you don't get some mega building covering most of the property or 40% of it.
And you got to remember that these guys got deep pockets.
Mm.
Yep.
They buy a lot of land.
Yep.
Yeah.
It may not be currently available.
All right. And we're going to talk about restrictions on cooling then it would be all on site. So you wouldn't have taking water from an external source.
Well, that could be one of the regulations, but I assure you, there are many data centers built with external sources just right now.
Yeah, but I don't, external for what? What are they using for?
So did you mean that they're taking it, I'm just picking, similar to a millstone, where they're taking it from the ocean and then cleansing it and putting it
That's
back?
what I think we don't want to do. If you want to have a retention pond there for using it as a cooling source, fine, but I don't think you want to take a stream and divert it, or you don't want to take water from the reservoir and run it through and then put it back.
Well, would they be allowed to do that under any circumstances?
I
They
can't,
they can't
Well, I
touch a
think that's
reservoir.
where they get their high water use from. Now, is
Yeah,
they were using a source and then putting it back in somewhere.
Yes, but they're not using a reservoir. What they're using
They
an
could-
existing
They
lake
could
or an
have a
ocean.
pond in there and use
But
it.
they have a pond, but we don't have a pond.
or
They
a
could
water
build
main.
one.
You put in a
They could build one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
12-inch
EP
water main.
uses a ton of water from from the town.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't think we want to use an existing natural water source unless it's contained, like a lake or a pond on the site. I think it has to be, whatever they use for cooling has to be something done on the site.
I'm sort of having a hard time imagining all this stuff. There's a lot of things. I think we need more information, just what all these things, at least I do. Can you build a cooling tower like they do for a nuclear power plant?
That's why nuclear power plants are down near an ocean or a gigantic
Yeah,
lake.
because they
That's
use
where they get the
water.
water.
And that's where a lot of data centers originally were built.
Right.
And,
But we don't want to do that.
okay,
We can't do it on the sites. Well, actually, maybe you possibly could down by the airport. But that's
Oh,
not
you
where
could
we
if you put it in the airport, yes.
If we put it in the airport, then we don't care. Go ahead and pipe the ocean into there. We don't care.
Well, then you're
No.
gonna be pumping water.
Warm water back, somebody's gonna complain about that.
Well, then that's their problem, but I don't think that's a zoning
It'll
problem.
kill some more lobsters, so.
Yeah, I would not be in agreement with that.
Yeah, I don't think that's sound.
No, I think that whatever they do has to be done on site.
Actually, when there's, in a cooling tower, I don't think the water that you put back is any warmer than the water you took out. It's the evaporation
Well-
that cools, that's cooled. So
Yeah.
you're
I
not
don't
just
have a cooling
using
tower.
it like a radiator. So it's not really an issue to us.
Well, it has to eventually, if it goes in, it has to go into the air.
It goes into the air. That's true.
It heats up the environment, yeah.
The
But I
environment.
don't think it's that a large amount. I don't know what it would be.
Will give us some more clouds.
Yeah.
I think
Move the rain.
I think we have to answer some of these questions with a direction, and then we need to look into them a bit more. I'm not saying HW has to look into it, but between the town and ourselves, et cetera, I think we need to look into some of these things.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, can we
size,
all agree that, backup power shall be provided by battery or other non-polluting, non-noise generating methods? Just as a statement? Just make that statement.
yeah, we have some of those regulations, or what a lot of people are now calling, if I can find it, is carbon neutral certificates, right? So those are some of the regulations that we could put into this.
Are we that concerned with, I mean, I'm asking the question.
Does that
really.
mean like,
Are we that
is it like
concerned
a
with-
offset?
No, we're saying backup power. And that's why I said with backup power, do we really care that much?
We care that they're not diesel generators, right?
That part's true.
Yeah.
That part's true. It shouldn't be diesel, but I don't know if we care if they're gas or something else that isn't great.
Yeah.
But it's not like peak shaving where you expect it to run every afternoon. There's something that they'll run it once a month for an hour to make sure it works.
Mhm.
50 megawatts of power is a ton of whatever.
Yes.
I think Kevin's right. We probably you know, we're all coming up on 7 o'clock now. So
Yeah.
maybe we can get through these, but we understand some of the concerns and we'll do some research, but maybe we can get through the rest of these questions
What about
so
decommissioning?
that HW can start doing some regulations.
Yeah.
But should we have some regulation in here for decommissioning the facility?
Sure.
Yep.
Especially since there's,
Yep, again, a lot of that is very similar to language I think you already have for solar and wind.
what, for decommissioning sites?
Yep.
Yeah, but it's different than industry, isn't it?
Oh, yes, the details are different, but your ability to request a decommissioning plan.
And funding. Well, I guess that's up to the agreement,
Yes, a lot of that you push to the agreement between the town and the facility.
yeah, but I think we should have it in our regulation that one's required.
And then I want to hear more about fire suppression and the mitigation plan as well. Kevin, you alluded to a fire at Google.
Yeah.
And then if you, and I've done this and everyone should do it, just Google that word, data center fire, and you will see horrific
There's a lot of power, Michael.
sites. So it's,
Yep.
it's a concern, and I want to make
It
sure that
should be.
that's
Yeah.
yeah, no doubt. Well, I mean, there was like pictures of things that were just like, unbelievable when these things, and that's also a concern that I have with the reservoir. Just the smoke from something like this would make our water undrinkable. And so we've got to have that covered,
Yeah.
And there are a lot of good examples from other communities of fire suppression and mitigation plans.
Well,
that we can-
that's all well and good, but, and I've said this before, every other community isn't building these things next to my reservoir. So that's my concern. And I'm going to keep repeating myself, but that's it. Sorry, go ahead.
What about vibration standards? What are those? Why would we have vibrations?
Again, for just the heavy equipment, it's
heavy
another thing that can
equipment?
be a nuisance for people if they're too close to it and they feel the vibration from the machines. It's very similar to noise
not
standards.
They're not machines, they're computers, right?
Yes, but again, I think
conditioning.
mostly with this, it would come from the generators. Again, this is
Oh, the
something.
generators, yes.
Yes, this is something that, again, we pulled from what other communities have regulated in regards to data centers, and this is a list of some of the more
Mhm.
common things that other communities have chosen to regulate.
So
Yeah, sounds like size limits, you're comfortable with that being controlled by the existing limits for any building within these zoning
Mhm.
districts.
Right.
Yeah, I think much like with what we did with cannabis, I think we can assume that you'll want to regulate all of these things and start with that assumption. And if there are things that seem overboard, we can pull them out. If there are things that don't seem protective enough, we can keep going. But I assume you'll want us to address everything on this page.
I say yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just curious about, I don't think we touched too much on the electricity use. And I didn't know, Groton Utilities does have a capacity somewhere of what they can produce. But I didn't know if this newer data center, if that was less of a concern, or if these are really some big numbers we don't know about, or what, so.
Yeah, that's why we don't necessarily recommend setting a standard, but saying you have to show this agreement with the local utilities. Your local utility has to sign off and say, yeah, we can handle this.
Yeah, they would have to increase their infrastructure.
I just think it's an informational question. I know it doesn't affect necessarily regulations, but I'd like to have an idea of what kind of scale they're talking about on this.
Huge. Well, it depends,
Yeah.
it depends on the actual application that you can't.
Yeah, there should be like a capacity planning a little bit. We'd love to be able to see the agreement with water and electrical capacity agreements in order to hit peak when at full 40% of the occupied and whatever watts they're drawing. We just want to make sure they can meet that, because that's what's happening down in Data Center Alley, Dominion Resources, and can't do it. And it means moratorium. I don't know what that means for us, but I don't want it all of a sudden someone say, because
Kevin, have you ever seen where they would, like, and this might be entirely, well, I was just, Kevin, have you ever, is like putting up a windmill at another location and just adding to the grid? Is that something that
Never
is?
seen it. Never seen it.
Just wondering.
No.
I think it's
So I
just
like
for me.
it. Just to answer Jeff's question, I would say yes, but there's also, I think, the agreement with the water is great, but I'm not sure all of us have a handle on the water and the runoff and stuff. And you may just say, hey guys, it's already monitored in that fashion. With the caveat, which I have to say, I agree with Michael, the reservoir is one of the greatest assets that Groton has. So in no way should we try to diminish that asset. So, but yes to all these.
Okay.
Mhm. Is there any other information you need, Jeff, or input?
I think this is good for at least taking a first stab. Again, recognizing that I'm sure we'll have robust discussion after a first draft, but this at least gives us the basics we need to take that first stab.
Yeah.
And I would hope this would be a special permit.
Yes, I thank you for bringing that up, Steve. Based on everything everyone has been discussing tonight, I had already made that assumption, but I know we hadn't actually discussed that. Would everyone agree that you'd be more comfortable with the special permit process for this use?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, we ought to have some decent regulations or requirements for the permit.
Hmm.
Well, yes,
Yep.
that would be
Yes.
all the other things we've just.
Jeff, do you need any information on the cryptic?
Thank you, thank you. So yes, and I know that Kevin, you were hoping we would go back to cryptocurrency. This is one
Yeah.
thing that, as I have researched, and Kevin, if you have opinions on this, would love to hear them. I don't see why you would allow these. I don't see what the value would be to the community. It's like all the potential downsides and none of the upsides. But would love, Kevin,
Yeah.
is there any thoughts you have about cryptocurrency?
So I do have some thoughts which are a little different than that. So cryptocurrency mining, where they run into the problems when they build poor data centers and they're doing 100% exclusive crypto mining, and you see all those out there. Like what happened to our neighborhood because they didn't have any regulations for data centers, and a very inexpensive data center came in and it's a complete mess, right? But a crypto currency mining to me is just a workload. So I can take one of Microsoft Azure's big data centers, and unless they have a service level agreement that says no crypto mining, that's actually a moneymaker. It's no different than any other workload in any of these big data centers. So if someone builds a big data center and cryptocurrency is one of the workloads, to me, that's okay. But as a standalone, if we can say that as far as any regulation, we should not have any standalone cryptocurrency mining data centers. That's how I would put it.
That's well put. That was actually sort of my thought, that we define cryptocurrency mining prohibited as a standalone use, but there's no way that you'd be able to prohibit a data center from, like you said, using that as part of their load. That was sort of thank you. That's a much better way of putting it.
And I don't own cryptocurrency and I've never bought it, but is it like a moral issue or what? Is it just like that thing?
In a data center, if you build a standalone cryptocurrency, you're mostly likely putting in a very cheap data center that is loud, that has diesel generator. You did it cheap, right?
Okay, that I understand.
Right. So when you do crypto, when you mine it, it's basically creating algorithms that no one else has, and you get coins for creating these algorithms more than anything else. And now what's taking place in cryptocurrency mining is that I build secure enclaves. And we used to do this for, let's say, intelligence community. The crypto guys keep getting their stuff stolen. So they need some sort of secure enclave to build that, right? So to build a secure enclave and do a huge amount of algorithms within that enclave is massively expensive. And you make a lot of money if you have better algorithms than anything else, and you have digital currency out there. And that's how it's done. I mean, pretty simplistic. Gets a little more detailed than that, of course. But so ethically, to me, it's just, am I finding gold in Groton by, diving into the ocean? To me, it's the same thing. And I have no ethics against it. I don't know anyone who should, but to me, it's just a workload, but it should never be a standalone workload.
I guess another way to look at it, though, is that the reason we want to have a data center is so all these other businesses, we want self-driving cars, we want better latency, we want to have all these things that we need. And having a big data center locally is a good thing to do that. That's why we want to jump through all these hoops to make this work.
Yeah.
Cryptocurrency isn't on one of those lists. We don't want to jump through those hoops so we could do cryptocurrency.
Yeah, there's no sharing of profit in cryptocurrency, correct? None of the.
Not if it was a standalone, not if it was a standalone.
Right.
That's correct.
And none of
Ethically,
the
I'm
tax
just-
breaks should be applying, well, either, I would think, if it's a standalone.
How is this, I'm just like, I'm not to be, but how is it different than what we had the conversation before? And I'm not proposing cryptocurrency, but that if someone were to come in and manufacture something else, well, why are we concerned about what's going on inside the building?
I have no answer for that. I mean, I agree.
Yeah, no, but I don't also think that cryptocurrency is a good, because I think that by doing all of this, there is a cost to Groton, and that's why we as the zoning and planning zoning commission are trying to protect the town and to lessen that cost while also benefiting from, the tax dollars that come in from it. But I don't know what, I mean, I don't really, I don't think I would support cryptocurrency, but I just wonder how it's different. I don't know.
Yeah, well, to me, it's the exact same thing in a data center. It's like, would you allow someone to come in and build submarines with nuclear power plant or generators in them? If it was in the 1960s, the answer is not in the 60s, I wouldn't. Maybe now I would, right? But we have that in our town. To me, crypto is just another workload. I mean, more than anything else, it contributes in the same way that the data center does. Very few jobs, and it gives you your whatever our user fee agreement will be. That's all it is. It's just another workload. So I'm not against it ethically. I'll say that, but other people could be,
So this was one thing that I was uncertain of. Based on the state's legislation and agreements, would a standalone cryptocurrency count as a data center and get the incentives from the state? My impression was that they would not.
So I don't know that, Jeff.
I think to Hal's point, there are all these social benefits for a data center that's contributing to all the great things that we like to do with the internet and such. And the cryptocurrency, if it's strictly cryptocurrency data mining, it's not providing that social good. And that's sort of the main difference in my head.
Okay.
Again, it's not like you could stop a legitimate data center from also doing cryptocurrency, but you really want that to be the sole purpose of.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or I would suggest, could we regulate against them doing self-driving cars?
What?
Well,
You know what I mean?
No, I'm sorry, I didn't follow.
I missed that.
Well, I just like, if we can regulate how this stuff is being used, I don't know. I'm not arguing for it. I'm gonna stop talking.
But is the cryptocurrency issue really one for signing the agreement with the data center, not for planning and zoning concern?
Yes,
I
that tends to
think
be
that's
my,
the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Because I don't think it makes any difference planning and zoning wise, but it
Right.
might make a difference.
no,
to
it
the
really doesn't.
Town council, if they sign an agreement, they want to make sure it's what's the data center used for.
Yes, I agree.
Is there anything else we should discuss tonight?
So if we've got the time and you've got the energy, would you be able to talk a little bit about the draft on cannabis and just see if we're heading in the right direction for that?
Sure. Right?
Low hanging fruit, I think, for me.
Yeah, I hope that we're
Maybe.
at least, if we can confirm that direction in our next 13 minutes, and then at our next meeting, we can dive back into short-term rentals, because I'm sure most of our audience today was really hoping to dive into that. So let's see, moving on to cannabis. And again, I'll just briefly go over what we have provided for you. So we did draft some regulations. We included, of course, new definitions, and we don't have a lot of leeway here. The definitions are largely controlled by Connecticut general statutes. So for all the adult cannabis use definitions, plus we did use the medical marijuana dispensary facility definition used in chapter 420F. And was that a joke? Did they make it chapter 420 on purpose, or did it just happen to fall that was the next number? Sorry, we don't have time for my jokes. Anyway,
What's 420F? It's no good if you have to explain a joke.
So per our discussion, or your discussion last fall, we did also take the cannabis food and beverage manufacturer and split it up into small scale, 3,000 square feet or less, and large scale, more than 3,000 square feet, to mimic what you have for food and beverage production today. So in the table of permitted uses, we have divided the various cannabis use types into the different categories. So the cannabis retailer and hybrid retailer and medical marijuana dispensary facility fall under retail. Basically the growers of cannabis are falling under agriculture, and then all the other categories, cannabis delivery service, product manufacturer, product packager, transporter, food and beverage manufacturer, all fall under industrial. We did try to add a parking code wherever that was relevant, and cross-reference to the conditions to make that consistent with other uses in the use table. In terms of the use standards, the conditions, what we're proposing is that you add a new section to section 5.1-15 called adult use cannabis use. And while we recognize that a number of the uses could fall under these various other categories that already exist, agriculture, retail, industrial, we thought it would just be easier for people to follow if everything related to cannabis was in one place in this new section. We did add, per your direction, that any adult cannabis use shall require a special permit if it's abutting a residential zoning district. And also just wanted to reiterate that all the buffer requirements of section 8.16 would apply to these adult use cannabis uses. Continuing on, conditions for consumer retail sales. So those retail and hybrid retailers. So we have added, there is a distance between any two establishments of at least 1,000 feet. And as we discussed, we also added a buffer around schools, libraries, playgrounds, parks and recreation facilities of at least 500 feet. And I know that Hal and others are hoping that the group can also consider adding such a requirement for liquor stores as well. So that may be something that we continue to pursue concurrently, but separately. that a security plan would be required, and that state permits would be required to be presented to the town before any local permits were considered. We also want to reiterate that these conditions do not apply to medical marijuana facilities, which of course the state regulates separately and that are treated as any other retail use per state law. And then secondarily, another list of shorter list of conditions for when sales are not directly to consumers. So all those other uses other than retail and hybrid retail. So we're going to require that all cultivation and manufacturing must take place indoors. Again, a security plan would be required. And again, the state permits would be required before local permits would be considered. And again, this is just another opportunity to reiterate that environmental performance standards from section 7.4, including odor control, which is particularly important for cannabis, would apply to these uses. That's my last slide for this. Yes. So in our last few minutes, just wanted to open it up to conversation about this draft. Did we hit the mark? Are there things that you're still concerned about? Other issues that we should be considering?
Where did the 500 feet come from? Why is it 500, not 1,000, not 750? I just wonder where that came from.
Honestly, that came from, we had been looking at examples of other Connecticut communities, and that seemed to be a pretty standard distance, but there is no science in that. And if you want to go greater or lower, that is certainly within your rights.
Okay, because I was hoping to be able to do I don't know if you guys have the ability to do it with the GIS. We did at Subbase to do, I'll call it a sensitivity analysis, if in fact just show setbacks off of the other areas and to how confining it would be if you increase some things to 750 to 1,000. I kind of did it myself just using radii from different things.
Yep.
And it, even no matter how big I got it, there's still almost always allowed plenty of room to be able to put these things along our major corridors in the vicinity of Walmart, up at the top of the hill and down at what we call downtown Groton. No matter how big you make them, it just kind of squeezes where they could be, but never prohibits them. So I wouldn't mind having some of those get a little bigger, just because one block, 500 feet, isn't much of a separation from a school, isn't much of a separation from the library or a park. So the more we can kind of separate this, and I'm thinking, as I say, I'm thinking liquor stores too.
Yep.
Or we can just get it deeper within the commercial areas, I think the better.
And then on that same note, you specify in the 1,000 foot that it's measured from the front door, but it sounds like it's different with this, like it's going, is it, or am I missing that? Sounds like it's lot line to lot line,
For the
the 500 feet.
500 feet, yes. I believe that one was lot line to lot line.
So I just would like to think about that a little bit more,
Okay.
Jeff. And then my other concern there is in the uses that we defined here, private and the public and private school, and then the recreational facility, those two things. I don't know about private schools. If we should be like, because I don't think that we have any control over where they are. A lot of times it could be a school, I don't know where, I know there's like a little nursery school my daughter went to at Trails Corners. And so do you want to, and it's a nursery school. I don't, and what you call a school, I don't, we had the massage school. We used to have it on you know what I mean? So I think when I think of school, I think of our public schools, not private schools, or, other kinds of schools. And then the other thing is recreational facility. Once again, if it's a tennis club, and it's a recreational facility, but I think we have to be specific about that. Probably should be public, I think.
All right. How do other people feel about that? Would you prefer that those categories be defined as public schools, public recreation and parks?
The school part, maybe not. The park, I'd say yes. I agree with parks. Because
No, I said recreation. facility, like a
Public
tennis
park
club.
and recreation facilities.
Right,
They're public recreation.
public recreation, yeah.
Hmm?
And I guess that'd be another one where, when you plot that on a map, what would that actually do?
Now, the town had developed that map of where all these things exist, and it would be easy enough to do a radius and say, here's what it is at 500 feet, here's what it is at
Right.
1,000 feet.
That's
Deb,
right.
is that something that your staff can do? If not, we can certainly do that.
No, yeah, we can do that. And just to be clear, we're buffering that off of the property lines, not
Right.
off of the actual facility.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
That's what I couldn't do with my magic marker too well, so that was a little tougher.
So I guess is like Precious Memories, is that considered a school?
Well, again, it comes down to how are we going to define the school?
Yeah, so that's
Yeah.
why
Right.
I thought public would just
I
be
think it has to
cleaner,
be.
but
But it's not, yeah, because
Yeah.
nursery daycares are very often private, so we have to figure out how to make that distinction.
Well, the problem is with private, after you have set up a facility, one facility, and then somebody moves a private facility that would prohibit it in the area, then you lose the effect of it. It's got to be.
Well,
public,
Yeah,
which is a
but
permanent location.
yeah, so that's fine. It just means if they ever sell the facility, and want to turn it into something else, then they would have to. But it just becomes, once they're there, they're there. I mean, just doing some of the radii, that new mega, due to the location of the schools and churches, I'm seeing that new mega large liquor store that's just on the other side of 95, that wouldn't be permitted because it's too close to a church.
Mhm.
Too bad. It'll be there. It's already established. So that's not something we should worry about.
Yeah, I agree. And one thing I do need to look into, and maybe a question for your town attorney. I know the state was like, here are the things that you can have a distance between, and there was a state list, and I don't know if we'll have to ask if we can massage that to correspond with the uses, the specific uses in your use table that correspond with those things, because you already have all these things very well defined in zoning. I mean, even, you mentioned, Michael, the other types of schools, like you already have a definition for like trade schools and blah, blah, that is separate from public schools and, grade schools. So I think as long as it's okay with the state law, I think we can probably just pull specific uses from your use table, because you've already got those very well defined.
okay. Those were my only concerns,
Okay.
concerns.
All right, so we'll
Some of the-
save short-term rentals to our next meeting.
Looks like it. Again, one thing I'll say one thing, which we noted in our memo, but I just want to reiterate, all the mapping that you saw, was our first stab at thinking through, all right, what were some of the places where this group said, yeah, we could consider allowing short-term rentals within residential districts under these circumstances. So we thought, all right, if we list those performance standards out and then come up with a rational way to map that, what would that look like? So I just want to reiterate that this was just a thought exercise, and those maps are not our recommendation. It was just a starting point for trying to put on paper the initial ideas you had where you thought short-term rentals might be appropriate within residential zoning districts. So I just wanted to make sure no one was confused that this was something that we were proposing or saying, yeah, this is great. We know that there are lots of issues with this first iteration. It was really just a starting point for having a more concrete conversation about where these might be appropriate and where not.
Hey, Jeff, can I just ask a question? One of the things that I wanted to, make sure we got right up front was crisp definitions. And, short-term rental right off the bat, being no more than 30 days, does differ a little bit from what the IRS considers short-term rentals. So should we be aligning ourselves, or are we, all good with coming up with our own?
Well, again, I don't think you should go completely off the rails. I think 30 days is pretty standard. I don't think you have to follow. I mean, again, tax policy and land use policy, two very different things.
Yeah, but
I don't think you need to be.
let me just say why, because when they talk about short-term rentals in the IRS, they're saying something that averages, I think it's 7 days or less on average. So if you rent so many days a year, you divide up how many people you've had. And if it averages out to 7 days or less, then by tax code, you're considered this. You're doing short-term rentals. If you don't do it that way, then even the IRS calls it a business. And it's a business that is not renting out your own house. You're essentially a hotel.
They
Sure, I
call
would
them
say that
hotels.
The IRS does.
IRS calls them a hotel.
Yeah.
Which could change from year to year depending on the activity that they experienced in that year.
Yeah.
Which,
That's
again, that's where it becomes really difficult to translate an act. That's why this is so messy in zoning, right? Because you're talking about an activity as opposed to a use. And that's where it gets really, really squirrely to try to regulate that in zoning.
Yeah. And personally, I think that our job is to make the distinction in between having a business and renting out your house for a couple of weeks. If you don't live there and you rent your house out 365 days a year in whatever combination, you're a business, and as far as I'm concerned.
Well, unless you're renting out to one person for that 365 days.
Correct. Well, it's a business, actually.
Well, yeah, and then
Well,
that's the
and
other
then
thing we have
that
to
person-
remember. Lots of businesses are allowed in residential zones. You have a whole slew of business activity that's allowed. So it's not the business use that's the problem. So I want us all to remember that as we continue this conversation.
No, it's that it's not residential anymore. It's not a residential use. It's being used as for business primarily.
Yeah.
And then also, Jeff, and I'm two things I just want to touch on, then I'll be quiet. The definition that you used on this referred to dwelling units, and that we were using that definition because the town council had used it in their the ordinance that they almost passed a year ago, or considered it, and now I think it's off by a month. But that word dwelling unit, in the definition that the town council is using, dwelling unit is different than the definition of dwelling unit in our regulations, markedly different. It's very different. So dwelling unit in the ordinance is different than a dwelling unit in our zoning regulations. And in our zoning regulations, it says that dwelling unit is exclusively residential. So it's just a little, I think we need to get that cleaned up. And then I thought at some point you had suggested, and I would like to see this, that if we could get like a questionnaire, because sometimes I was reading this document and I was kind of thinking, did I miss a meeting? Because I think that sometimes you might hear one or two people say something, it may have been me, and then you think everybody agrees with Michael, and they might not. So I think it would be helpful if we could like write it down, the questions, and then you're not trying to guess what it is that we're trying to tell you, I think.
Writing down your questions is always a great thing. That is super helpful for us. And
Well, yeah, it could just be like 1 page or 2 pages, and then I could, just write a sentence, check a box, whatever, however you want to do it. But I think it would probably be a good way for you to then know what because I know some people say, I think we all agree, but that doesn't mean that we all agree. And we're not taking votes here on agreements. So hopefully, is there any agreement?
But to clarify, what you're talking about, Michael, is that we are sent a questionnaire that we will fill out and send back.
That's what I would like to be able to do.
Not that we're sending in comments.
No. I would hope that either staff or Horsley Witten, somebody could put together a questionnaire so that a lot of these assumptions that you have to make are not assumptions anymore.
And we have tried to, that's been one of the things we've done with putting these questions together in advance. It's like,
Yeah, but I think I need more than 4 or 5 questions. You know, because there's a lot of things in here that are discussed, and I would like to be able to weigh in, but I don't want to be the only one or just 1 or 2 people who are doing all the, you know, making assumptions. I don't want to be that person.
Well, maybe the questions are actually enough, but all you need is a little slot next to them saying yes, no, and why for each one. And
That's it.
If each one of us just checked off yes or no and either skipped it from there or had a little bit of explanation, there aren't 50 of us. There's only a few of us, so maybe it's not too bad. And that way that you would have a record, Horsley Witten would have a record of what the individuals of us were thinking, and then we can discuss it. Good heads up.
Again, I think it would be, again, that has been the intention of these memos, is to lay out these questions in advance. And if it would be easier for us to put it in a format where you can literally fill it out like a questionnaire, we're happy to do that.
Yeah, I think it would also like say, because I think that this is going to be a lot of discussion, and it might lessen that discussion a little bit if you can start from a place that's where you have more information.
Yeah. And again, I recognize that I would not say, and I would not characterize that we came to any consensus. I was just taking some of the most common things we heard as a starting point for discussion. So yeah, there was no, I would not characterize it as a.
No, I appreciate that. No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make an assumption.
It wasn't a criticism, that's your
No,
point.
no. I was not
Right.
at all. In fact, I
Right.
appreciated your initial comments there. It was spot on.
Cool. Well, we can certainly do that, and you know, we can get that to you soon, and you can put anything else in writing that can help us prepare for the next meeting. So it sounds like we're pretty much on target with cannabis. We'll do some more work on the buffers. We have what we need to do a first draft for data centers, and again, we'll put together this survey basically for you all to fill out, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, so that we can start with short-term rentals at our next meeting and see how many of these issues we can reach a decision on.
Okay.
And I know we're a little past our time. Thank you so much. Anything else before we close?
No, just thank you. You did a great job getting us to
I
this point.
appreciate
We
it.
appreciate it.
Absolutely. I know these are difficult and contentious issues with a lot of moving parts. So I really appreciate the time and thought that you're all putting into this. Thank you for being good civic servants. I know it can be a very thankless job, so I really appreciate your work.
So we'll have something in advance for the next get together.
That's right.
We'll have some
I
homework.
think if we have something to look at before the meeting to
Mhm.
narrow down the discussion, it will help.
Well, something to look at that we should individually respond to. We got
Right.
lots to look at, but we'd have to
Yeah.
write dissertations.
Oh, we ought to have our responses in,
Yeah,
in before.
And even if if people are comfortable sharing them, you know, it might aid in the conversation. It's up to everybody, I suppose, or what people think.
Well, we
You have
could-
to be careful on that. though.
That becomes.
That's what I
Okay.
was gonna say.
Exactly. You
Yeah,
don't want to open meeting. You have your open meeting.
exactly.
Yep.
Yeah,
Consideration.
exactly.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay,
Does anyone have anything else? I'll entertain a motion for you adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. So. our
Right.
time's up.
Right. Thank you all.
All right.
Thanks,
Great.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
thank you.
Bye.
Good night.